Adventure games are games that focus on allowing the player to explore an environment. These games may focus on the changes the player does to the environment, or it may focus more on allowing the player to explore a large world with quests inside said world, however the quests not being major things the player has to complete quickly. There are three main subgenres of adventure games, with these subgenres being point-and-click adventure games, open-world games, and sandbox games. I will go through these one by one, beginning with sandbox games. Sandbox games are games where the player is allowed to do many things shifting the world around them. These typically have a crafting mechanic and will allow the player to explore a large world. The game being shown at the moment is the highest grossing game of all time, Minecraft. Minecraft is a game in which the player is dropped into a randomly generated world with nothing and must destroy trees and other blocks in order to then gain the ability to craft stuff out of these items, allowing them to get more items in some way or to improve their survivability. The player can also place items, allowing for them to build things and allowing for every player to have a unique experience with Minecraft. Minecraft does have an overall goal, being to kill a boss called the Ender Dragon, and there are certain steps the player must go through to complete this. The player must get Ender Pearls and Blaze Rods from the enemies, the Enderman and the Blaze. Ender Pearls can be gathered in other ways, however Blaze Rods cannot. This goal, however, is far disjointed from the rest of the game and allows the player to reach that goal in however they want. There's players who will attempt to reach the goal incredibly quickly, however there's players who don't truly focus on this goal and will instead choose to explore the game's world. This allows for a diverse and unique group of players to form, with some players playing the game in order to build stretching landscapes and giant structures, such as the statue that I was building in the clip shown here, whilst other players attempting to get the best equipment, and other players attempting to create automation in everything they would normally do, creating what is referred to as a farm. Another sandbox game that uses its features in a very similar way to Minecraft is Terraria. Terraria, often jokingly referred to as a 2D version of Minecraft, is another block-based sandbox game. Terraria also similarly has the distant end goal of a final boss. This final boss is called the Moon Lord. However, to get to the Moon Lord, instead of having to collect a series of items, you must not only collect a few items but also beat a series of bosses. These bosses consist of the Wall of Flesh, Skeletron Prime, the Twins, the Destroyer, Plantera, Golem, the Lunatic Cultist, and then the Pillars event before eventually defeating the Moon Lord. However, there are also optional bosses and events throughout the game. These are the Eye of Cthulhu, Skeletron, the Eater of Worlds, the Brain of Cthulhu, Duke Fishron, King Slime, Queen Slime, the Empress of Light in both her night and day form, the Solar Eclipse, the Blood Moon, the Goblin Armor, the Snow Legion, and both the Frost and Pumpkin Moon. Alongside this, there are many other optional objectives the player may choose to go through, including getting all armor of a specific class, getting certain rare weapons, moving in all the NPCs in the game, and doing 200 quests for the Angler. These challenges may cause the player to go out of their way to do things they usually wouldn't do and encourage different player types. They also, just like Minecraft, have a large community of people dedicated to making automated farms. Another sandbox adventure game is Ark Survival Evolved. Ark Survival Evolved is a game where the player is dropped into a large open area with many dinosaurs and other ancient beings roaming the lands. The player must then gather resources and craft new things in order to make their way up the evolutionary totem pole, allowing them to stun and tame dinosaurs, and eventually leading them to fight 4 bosses. 3 of these 4 bosses are made obvious from the beginning of the game. While the bosses themselves will be unknown to new players, their locations are marked by giant obelisks in the sky. The player may be attracted to these and may journey to them early in the game. However, the game makes it clear that the player will need artifacts to open these obelisks. These artifacts will be found around the map, and the player can find them either naturally or using a guide. While the map isn't randomly generated like the previous 2 games discussed, it is able to be chained by a player. The player will need to cut down trees, harvest bushes, and mine through rocks in order to get materials such as flint, stone, wood, thatch, metal, fibre, and different berries. This will cause these trees, rocks, and bushes to be gone until they respawn after a specific amount of time. The player can also build structures in the map. These range from little non-mobile bases to stuff like what I'm building in this clip, which is a raft with platforms attached to it in order to sail on the ocean. In conclusion, sandboxes are a type of adventure game in which the player will focus on gathering resources and creating things out of these resources, with the player then being able to make some change to the world, either by building in it or destroying parts of it, and has a goal that is far off in the future, however isn't the goal for all players. Next, I will discuss open world adventure games. Open world adventure games are a form of adventure game centering around the player having a story to follow, however the world being very open. This game style is more popularly used by Rockstar. Rockstar Games are the creators of the Grand Theft Auto franchise and the Red Dead Redemption franchise, and in both of these franchises, the player is hit with very large open maps that become able to be explored by him after only a few hours of gameplay at most. These maps will have many places for a player to explore and many things for a player to do in them, excluding the main quest. However, the player can continue down the main quest if that is what they want. The game currently being shown is Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was a game released in between the 4th and 5th entries in the Grand Theft Auto franchise, and is, just like all the other Grand Theft Autos, a game in which, after you complete the first few quests, you are given free exploration of a city. You can go around the city committing crimes and picking fights, or you can follow the quest line, or you can simply go around the city and have a look and enter shops to buy things. The game now being shown is Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead Redemption 2, or just shortened to Red Dead 2, is a game in which the player takes the role of a cowboy travelling through a map based on the Wild West. In this map, the player can, after completing a few hours of the game, freely explore, allowing them to pick fights, go to towns, and ride around on a horse. However, Rockstar isn't the only company that does open world adventure games. The game currently being shown is the game made by Rare known as Sea of Thieves. Sea of Thieves is a game where you play as a pirate. In this role as a pirate, you go around doing quests for certain companies. These quests may range from gathering treasure to defeating particularly strong enemies. The player then, after completing said quest, may return their treasure that they found into these companies to gain reputation with the companies and money for their treasure. However, the player doesn't have to do quests for these companies. The player can just freely explore the ocean map that the game gives you, along with a crew of up to 3 other players. The player can also stop off at many islands, including outposts patrolled by skeleton pirates, and may encounter many creatures along the seas such as krakens, megalodons, and ghost ships. The player can also engage in fights with other pirates, pilfering treasure and escaping to sell that treasure for their own money. Open world games, as have been discussed here, are games with some form of plot or quest system, however without that being integral to the player's experience. Next, I'll be discussing point and click adventures. Point and click adventure games are adventure games in which the player is thrown into an area and must use items to interact with other items around them in order to complete stuff. Originating largely from The Secret of Monkey Island, these games have the player explore areas gathering objects and combine said objects with other objects or the environment in order to progress the story. This allowed the player to test out many combinations of items and environment and items and characters to see how they will react. The game currently being shown for the example of this is Broken Age, which is a game where 2 people's separate stories come together through this gameplay feature. The player must figure out what items are good for the situation and combine them with the player, allowing them to progress the story. Next, I will cover 2 genres not mentioned in the intro, which are narrative adventures and walking simulators. First, I will cover walking simulators. Walking simulators are a type of adventure game that are centered more around being an experience for the player than being an actual game. It have the player journey from location to location, slowly walking with no other typical gameplay. It allows the player to hear stories through narrations or conversations that the characters have, allowing the player to further understand the experience of these characters. The game currently being shown is What Remains of Edith Finch. This is an incredibly popular indie walking simulator game in which the player experiences the story of a family who believed they were cursed because of the experiences of the members of the family mysteriously dying one after another. The last remaining member, Edith Finch, explores from room to room in the house, learning how each member of her family tragically died. Another example of a walking sim is the game Firewatch. Firewatch has the main character, while still being on radio to another lookout ranger called Delilah, adventure from his lookout tower in a national park and through several areas of the national park exploring mysteries. This game centers around mainly the character walking from one location to the next to discover what's gone on. Finally, I will discuss narrative adventure games. Narrative adventure games are a type of adventure game that were popularized by the company Telltale. Telltale, through their games, created games that were similar to movies, with the player choosing what the characters said or did. In some parts of these games, they would also have to search for items or search for solution to problems, have the game mainly centered around the characters' dynamics with each other. The most famous of these games is Telltale's The Walking Dead franchise. The footage currently being shown is from the remaster of the original 2014 Walking Dead game, and in this game, the main character Lee Everett must build relationships with several survivors of the apocalypse, with him also trying to survive himself and get the little girl he's looking after, Clementine, to safety. Another game company that creates games like this is Quantic Dream. They especially got popularity after their 2018 game, Detroit Become Human. In Detroit Become Human, there is 3 protagonists as opposed to the typical one that is used in these forms of games. These 3 protagonists then allows for higher stakes when the player is doing quick time events, as the player's characters can die. Another game that takes a similar format is Bandai Namco's Dark Pictures Anthology series. The entry that's currently being shown, House of Ashes, and its predecessors, Little Hope and Man of Medan, each have 5 unique playable characters. The player will swap between these at regular intervals, and any of these 5 playable characters, or all 5 of them, can die, leaving the player with anywhere from 0 to all 5 playable characters. This really encourages the player to attempt to make the best choices in order to keep all the characters alive. Another game in a very similar fashion to this, being in this genre, is Dontnod Entertainment's Life is Strange franchise. This footage is from the promotional game that they released for Life is Strange 2. Life is Strange Before the Storm, Life is Strange 2, Life is Strange True Colors, and The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit are all this format of game. Overall, adventure games span several unique subgenres which range from games that border on being interactive movies and are about the experience you have while playing the game, to games that are open world experiences where the player focuses more on what they'd like to do with the game than the game's end goal. In the description of this video is a playlist with videos like this on all the genres that I'm going to cover, so I hope you click on that, watch another one, and have a good one.